Hey guys, welcome back to the TD series with C#. Today we will be talking about something new, attacking, and it is actually very exciting. So I see that our scene is getting a little cluttered, so I'm just gonna delete this button we have created, and I will also delete its script. Or will I keep it? No, I'll keep it. That's alright. So we have 3 enemies and we have the tower. And basically what we want to achieve in this episode is to be able to have the tower attacking the enemies with a periodic attack. Periodic? Cyclic? Whatever. So first let's actually take a look at the Tower 2D script we have created before. Because if we're being honest here, we're missing a lot of features for this to be made. So at the moment, the only thing the tower does is detecting when an enemy is entering or leaving the area. From there, we have a lot of different ways to work with those enemies and the tower, but I think at either moment we will be using a list, basically. We will be creating a list that will keep track of all the enemies which are in, so that the tower can then choose to attack. So here I'm going to create a new public array, very most likely, and the type of this array is going to be containing enemy 2D. I will name it something like HasEnemiesInRange. And we also want to make sure that we are using the Godot collection to get the enemy 2D array here. So this array is something we want to initialize when we are creating our tower, basically. So I'm gonna create or initialize this array in the constructor of the tower rather than the ready function. So I'm gonna create the constructor by saying that we have a public tower 2D. Scripts like enemies in range is a new array of enemy 2D. So we have the array and we have signals which tell us when enemies are entering and exiting. And even more specifically, when an enemy is entering or exiting, we actually get an argument which is the area entering or exiting the tower area. So what we want to do, what we want to be able to do, is from this area, be able to retrieve the enemy 2D that the area belongs to. So let's just take a look at the enemy 2D we have created so far. We have an area 2D, a collision shape, and the enemy. And what happens is that when this area here enters the area of the tower has a notification which says this area 2D entered my area. So now the question is exactly how do we get the object enemy 2D by having the information of this area here. So technically you could just choose to get the parent of the area. That's eventually a kind of, I want to say, technique that you can use and say that this is going to be the technique of my project forever. Or you can create a script to make sure that whatever technique you create is going to be safe and secured. And it's exactly what we will be doing here. I'm going to create a script which is area 2D, but more specifically enemy 2D area. Enemy 2D area is great. So here, actually, I could give you this as an exercise. Try to make a function, a public function in this script which will return the enemy 2D that the area belongs to. So you can try to do that. Now let's actually talk about the options you have. The first option would be to use an export property. You just create a enemy 2D property within the area script and you drag and drop it from this enemy 2D to the area here, and it's gonna work very fine. Now let's actually talk about how it would work with getting a parent. It's kind of like using getNode for the first time, but we're going to use getParent instead. So let's create a public function which returns an enemy2d, which is going to be getEnemy2d. So let's return null at the moment. What we need is to actually have an enemy to return. And this enemy that we will get is, as we know, the parent of the area. So we're going to use the getParent function like this. But we have a slight problem. GetParent is kind of returning a node. And here, it's not a node that we want. It's a little bit more specific. It is an enemy2d, right? So we want to type this enemy2d to say that the parent we will receive is gonna be an enemy2d. So let's go back to the Tower script instead. Here, when the enemy is entering, we will, instead of printing something, we will add this enemy to the list we have created. So let's make a check just to make sure that the area we have is an enemy2d area. And we're gonna leave it like this. Now that we have confirmation that this area is indeed an enemy area 2D, we're gonna get the enemy 2D from it. So let's say that we have an enemy 2D, which I'm gonna name enemy, is gonna be equal to our A area as an enemy 2D area, and we're gonna use get enemy 2D. And there we have the enemy. So we can use this property here, this variable, but technically we don't really need the variable. It's just for explanation purpose. In fact, what we're going to do is have enemies in range, and we're going to add this item here. Eventually, if you want to try to do this, you can consider making a check which says that you basically want to make sure that the enemy isn't already in the array. That could be cool. In fact, let's do that. So we want to make sure that the enemy is not in the array already. So here, if the array, which is HasEnemiesInRange, and we're going to use the has method, contains method, we're going to use the contains method, which allows us to return, give an argument to enemy, and the array will tell us if it is part of this or not. So if that is the case, that the enemy is in range, then I will return to say, not doing anything about it. It's already in your array, it's entered again, shouldn't happen, but okay, fine. Otherwise, we will just have enemies in range, and we will add the enemy in it. Now we're going to do the opposite, the reverse. When the enemy is leaving the area, we're going to remove it from the array. So we're going to check exactly the same thing. If the area is an enemy 2D, we're going to act on it. Otherwise, we're going to use nothing and actually enemy 2D area. So we do grab the enemy 2D. There we go. And we check in our enemies in range. We check that it does contain the enemy we have. And if it is indeed contained, we remove it. So enemies in range dot remove, and here we should be able to send the argument enemy to remove this argument from the array specifically. Now we could go one step further, basically considering that is it possible that the enemy is appearing in the array it duplicates for some reasons. If that is the case, then we will actually check the condition enemies in range and it does contain the enemy. We will repeat that as long as we do find an enemy until we don't find it anymore. So we can do something like while there's an enemy contained in the array, we will remove it, which means that if there's a duplicate, gone. We should have enemies contained within this array now. Ideally, I would want to check this and make sure it works, but I don't want to make this episode extra long, so I will skip this check and move right to the next step, which is allowing the turret to attack. Here, let's go in our tower item. What I want is to have a turret attacking with a specific interval, and honestly, we don't want that to be too fast, and more specifically, we don't want this to happen every frame of the game. We want the tower to attack every half a second or every second, depends on your preferences. So in order to calculate this, we're going to use a timer node. So let's just add a simple timer node like this. Let's actually put the wait time to something like 0.5 and make it one shot. So the point of this timer basically is that when the tower has an enemy in range, it will attack. And then once it attacks, it triggers the timer as in, alright, I can't attack while the timer isn't exhausted. Then when the timer arrives at its end, then, alright, I can attack again. So let's bring this timer to our code here. Let's actually make an export thing and grab the timer to get the timer. And before we do forget in the future, let's build our project, grab the tower 2D and connect the timer to this new property. Alright, so tower 2D, range area, timer, tower 2D. Now basically we need two things. We need the process function to actually check if the tower should be attacking or not. And we need an attack function, which will allow the tower to actually attack an enemy. So these are the, I want to say, main functions that we want to use that will be doing the main features of the tower. However, we can also create other functions which are kind of utility functions, which can be useful for what we're doing here and eventually in the future. So I'm going to create two functions here. The first one is HasEnemiesInRange, which is going to return a boolean. So public bool HasEnemiesInRange takes no arguments, and at the moment will return false by default. Another method, which is going to be IsOnCooldown, also returning false by default. Then we'll have a public void function attack with specific enemy to the enemy to attack, and a process function that will be processing every frame. So here, this actually, wait, why did I put that between those two? Let's actually put that before the on area entered, and here we're going to have the public override process. Process or PhysicsProcess? Honestly, I guess both are fine. Let's try PhysicsProcess just for the curiosity here. Okay, so let's start with actually HasEnemiesInRange. So we have a condition which we can check quite easily, which is enemiesinrange.size or count. Yes, count. If the count is superior to 0, we do return true, and otherwise we return false. So technically we can kind of return this, right? This is a boolean condition and we're going to return that. True if the count is superior to 0. Yes. Now IsOnCooldown. Okay, so the timer this timer here, let's open the documentation. We have is stopped. So we have a read property, which is the time left. And this time left property is what we're going to use. If the timer is stopped, it will return 0. So basically, if the time left is different than 0, then we will consider that the tower is on cooldown. Right, so here we're going to return timer actually. Timer.timeLeft is superior to 0. Okay, cool. So we have HasEnemiesInRange and IsOnCooldown. Now, basically what we want to do in the process function, every frame, is check if we do have an enemy in range and if the tower is not on cooldown to be able to attack again. So here we're going to make a check, which is if has enemies in range and not, so we're going to have an AND operator as well as an inverted operator, is on cooldown. Make sure that we actually call the functions, and here we go. So if we have an enemy in range and we not have the tower on cooldown, we can do something. And what we'll be doing here is attack, except that there's one tiny thing missing, sort of. We don't have any kind of AI targeting logic in our tower, which means that if it has 5 enemies, what does it do? At the moment, let's just make it simple by making it random. So let's first call on the attack method. And we do need to give an enemy as an argument. And this is just going to be enemies in range dot pick random. So that we do attack a random enemy in a range area. Here, when an enemy is attacked, what do we do actually? Eventually you can try to figure out what we need to do here. Let's go for it. So basically, let's go through all the actions we have to do here. First, we need to use the enemy damage function. Then we do need to trigger the cooldown. And also, when we do that, use the enemy damage function, we kind of need to know how much damage. So at the moment, I'm actually going to use this in a very simple way. I'm going to have an export integer damage value here. So damage, which I will initialize at 3. And eventually, I will create export group categories. And the tower, like stats eventually. And I will put it before this other category. Right here, export category, which is going to be nodes or node connections. So now let's go. So now that we do have a damage stat, we can actually damage the enemy. Right, so first use the enemy damage function. So here we have an enemy 2D, and we're just going to use enemy damage, and we're going to use the damage of the tower. Nice. Now what we want to do is to trigger the cooldown. So eventually we can create a function for this, but at the moment I don't feel like it's going to be necessary. I'm just going to have the timer.start, and I'm just going to start the timer here. And we should actually be good. So let's build a project to see that our Tower 2D is indeed updating with the new damage property we have created. Okay, so we have 3 damages here. So by default, if we run the game in the current state, nothing should happen unless the enemies are actually moving in, which actually happens. I forgot about the enemies moving. And yeah, As you can see, they are being damaged as they move. So let's get rid of this move method and let's actually comment this line so that they do not move and that they do not surprise me. By default, nothing happens, right? The enemies are out of the tower range, and that's good. Eventually, you may want to go in your debug settings to say that you want the collision shapes to be visible. Now let's take one enemy and move it within the range of the tower. The tower will slowly chunk the enemy's life until it's ended. Okay. Now let's bring all the enemies within the tower range and see how the targeting is moving from one enemy to another. Okay. We have now a tower which is able to attack enemies as they enter its area, its range. So if you actually want to go one step further for an exercise or something, what you can do is see how we did this tower here. We have a damage function, and in the stats basically add the possibility to change the cooldown time of the tower. So it will require a little bit of reading regarding the time documentation. It should be quite simple, so I encourage you to try this. Anyway, that's all we'll be doing in this video today. It's been quite a while already. I hope the editing will chunk it down a lot. And yeah, if you did enjoy this, as usual, you can like, you can subscribe, you can do everything. And you can also join as a member to help me found the episodes and production of future episodes. You will get the episode earlier if you do that. At the moment we are one episode ahead on the member timeline. Also, you might want to check the Discord if you want to share the game you're creating along the series, or if you have questions because there are things you don't necessarily understand. We are always very eager to answer there. So that's all for me. You take care, and I will see you in the next video or your stream.